Vadis, chapter 10. The house of Vinicius was indeed decked in the green myrtle and ivy, which had been hung on the walls and over the doors. The columns were wreathed with grapevine. In the atrium, which was close above by a purple woolen cloth as protection from the night cold, it was clear as a daylight. 8 and 12 flame lamps were burning. These were like vessels, trees, animals, birds, or statues holding cups filled with perfumed olive oil, lamps of alabaster, marble, or gilt, Corinthian bronze, not so wonderful as that famed candlestick used by Nero and taken from the temple of Apollo, the beautiful and made by famous masters. Some of the lights were shaded by Alexandrian glass of transparent stuff from the Indus, of red, blue, yellow, or violet color, so that the whole atrium was filled with many colored rays. Everywhere was given out the odor of nard, to which Vinicius had grown used, and which he had learned to love in the Orient. The depths of the house, in which the forms of male and female slaves were moving, gleamed also with light. In the triclinium a table was laid for 4 persons. At the feast were to sit, beside Vinicius and Lygia, Petronius and Chrysothemis. Vinicius had followed in everything the word of Petronius, who advised him not to go for Lygia, but to send Atacinus, with the permission obtained from Caesar, to receive her himself in the house, receive her with friendliness and even with marks of honor. "Thou wert drunk yesterday," said he. "I saw thee. Thou didst act with her like a quarryman from the Alban hills. Be not over insistent, and remember that one should drink good wine slowly. Know, too, that it is sweet to desire, but sweeter to be desired." Chrysothemis had her own and somewhat different opinion on this point, but Petronius, calling her his vestal and his dove, began to explain the difference which must exist between a trained charioteer of the circus and the youth who sits on the quadriga for the first time. Then, turning to Vinicius, he continued, "Win her confidence, make her joyful, be magnanimous. I have no wish to see a gloomy feast. Swear to her, by Hades even, that thou wilt return her to Pomponia, and it will be thy affair that tomorrow she prefers to stay with thee." Then, pointing to Chrysothemis, he added, "For 5 years have I acted thus more or less with this timid dove, and I cannot complain of her harshness." Chrysothemis struck him with her fan of peacock feathers and said, "But I do not resist thou satire, out of consideration for my predecessor. But wert thou not at my feet? Yes, to put rings on my toes." Chrysothemis looked involuntarily at her feet, on the toes of which diamonds were really glittering, and she and Petronius began to laugh. But Vinicius did not give ear to their bantering. His heart was beating unquietly under the robes of a Syrian priest, in which he had arrived himself to receive Lygia. "They must have left the palace," said he, as if in monologue. "They must," answered Petronius. "Meanwhile, I may mention the predictions of Apollonius of Tyana, or that history of Rufinus, which I have not finished. I do not remember why." But Vinicius cared no more for Apollonius of Tyana than for the history of Rufinus. His mind was with Lygia, and though he felt that it was more appropriate to receive her at home to go in the role of a myrmidon to the palace, he was sorry at the moment that he had not gone, for the single reason that he might have seen her sooner, and sat near her in the dark, and in the double litter. Meanwhile, slave brought a tripod, ornamented with drums, heads, bronze dishes with coals, on which they sprinkled bits of myrrh and nard. "Now they are turning toward the Carinae," said Vinicius again. "He cannot wait. He will run to meet the litter, and is likely to miss them," exclaimed Chrysothemis. Vinicius smiled without thinking and said, "On the contrary, I will wait." But he distended his nostrils and panted, seeing which Petronius shrugged his shoulders and said, "There is not in him a philosopher to the value of one sestertium, and I shall never make a man of that son of Mars." They are now in the Carinae. In fact, they were turning toward the Carinae. The slaves called lampadari were in front. Others calling pediseci were in both sides of the litter. Atacinus was right behind, overseeing the advance, but they moved slowly, for lamps showed the badly in a space not lightning at all. The streets near the palace were empty. Here and there only some man moved forward with a lantern, but farther on the places was uncommonly crowded. From almost every alley people were pushing out in threes and fours, all without lamps and in dark mantles. Some walked on with the procession, mingling with the slaves. Others in greater numbers came from the opposite direction. Some staggered, as if drunk. At moments the advance grew so difficult that the lampadari cried, "Give way to the noble tribune, Marcus Vinicius." Lygia saw those dark crowds through the curtains which were pushed aside, and trembled with emotion. She she was carried away at one moment by hope and another by fear. "That is he. That is Ursus and the Christians. Now it will happen quickly," said she, with trembling lips. "O Christ, aid! O Christ, save!" Hatacinus himself, who at first did not notice the uncommon animation of the street, began at last to be alarmed. There was something strange in this. The lampadari had to cry oftener and oftener, "Give way to the leader, to the noble tribune." From the sides, unknown people crowded up to the leader so much that Atacinus commanded the slave to repulse them with clubs. Suddenly a cry was heard in front of the procession. In one instant all the lights were extinguished. Around the leader came a rush, and a brawl, struggle. Atacinus saw that this was simply an attack, and when he saw it, he was frightened. It was known to all Caesar with a crowd of attendants made attacks frequently for amusement in the Subura and in other parts of the city. It was known that even at times he brought out of this night adventures black and blue spot, but those who defended himself went to his death, even if a senator. The house of the guards, whose duty it was to watch over the city, was not very far, but during such attacks the guards threatened to be deaf and blind. Meanwhile there was an uproar around the litter. People struggled through and trampled one another. The thought flashed on the Atacinus to save Lygia and himself, above all, and leave the rest to their fate. So, drawing her out of the litter, he took her in his arms and strove to escape in the darkness. But Lygia called, "Ursus! Ursus!" She was dressed in white, hence it was easy to see her. Atacinus, with his other arm, which was free, was throwing his own mantle over her. Hastily, when terrible claws seized his neck, and on his head a gigantic crushing mass fell like a stone. He dropped in one instant, as an ox fell by the back of an axe before the altar of Jove. The slaves for the greater part were either lying on the ground or had saved themselves by scattering in the thick darkness around the turns of the walls. On the spot remained on the litter, broken in the one side. Ursus bore away Lygia to the Sibura. His commander followed him, disappearing gradually along the way. The slaves assembled before the house of Vinicius and took counsel. They had no courage to enter. After a short deliberation, they returned to the place of conflict, where they found a few corpses, and among them Atacinus. He was quivering yet, but after a moment of more violent convulsion he stretched and was motionless. They took him then and returned and stopped before the gate a second time. But they must declare that the Lord what had happened. Let Gullo declare it, whispered some voices. Blood is flowing from his face and from ours, and the master loves him. It is safer for Gullo than for others. Gullo, a German and old slave who had nursed Vinicius and was inherited by him from his mother, the sister of Petronius, said, I will tell him, but though ye all come, do not let his anger fall on my head alone. Vinicius was growing thoroughly impatient. Petronius and Chrysothemis were laughing, but he walked with quick step up and down the atrium. They ought to be here, they ought to be here. He wished to go out and meet the leader, but Petronius and Chrysothemis detained him. Steps were heard suddenly in the entrance. The slaves rushed into the atrium in a crowd, and halting quickly at the wall, raised their hands and began to repeat with groaning, Ah! Ah! Vinicius sprang toward them. What is Lygia? Cried he with a terrible and changed voice. Ah! Then Gullo pushed forward with his bloody face and exclaimed in haste and pitifully, See our blood, Lord, we fought. See our blood, see our blood. But he had not finished when Vinicius seized a bronze lamp. With one blow shattered the skull of the slave. Then seizing his own head with both hands, he drove his finger to his hair, repeating hoarsely, miserium, mi miserium. His face became blue, his eyes turned in his head, foam came out of his lips. Weeps, roared he at last, with an unearthly voice. Lord, take pity, groaned the slave. Petronius stood up with an expression of disgust on his face. Come, Chrysothemis, said he, if tis thy wish to look on raw flesh, I will give command to open a butcher's stall on the Carinae. And he walked out of the atrium, but through the whole house, ornamented in the green ivy he prepared for a feast, were heard, for a moment to moment, groans and whistling of whips, which lasted almost till morning.